The skies above Caldara 7 turned crimson as the clouds burned from the heat of atmospheric re-entry. Ships, dozens of them, cut through the blood-colored sky like silver arrows. They weren't invaders. They were refugees. From orbit, it looked like the planet was weeping. Nuren, the planetary coordinator for the Sithari race, stood at the evacuation point with his long, jointed fingers trembling against the cold glass of the observation deck. His species had been the first to detect the wave, a monstrous swarm of biomechanical entities tearing across sectors, devouring planets and life indiscriminately. Whole civilizations vanished before a single distress signal could be sent. The swarm didn't negotiate, it didn't communicate, it consumed. And now it was only days away from Caldara 7. The United Galactic Council had issued its orders. Retreat. Abandon all frontier planets, relocate to the core systems, preserve the dominant species. Survival was more important than pride. That was the directive, followed by over 60 species. Every one of them loaded their finest onto vessels, leaving research, colonies, and even kin behind. Everyone, except one. Nuren turned toward the screen. A single fleet of ships hovered in the orbital lanes, not loading, not preparing to flee. They were deploying. Humans, he whispered, disbelief thick in his voice. They had named their joint mission Operation Backbone, a poetic title only a human could love. While the galaxy ran for cover, they brought warships, orbital cannons, drop pods. Their fleet wasn't massive, but it was frighteningly determined. They weren't here to observe. They were here to fight. When the Sithari ambassador had asked them why they refused to evacuate, their leader had simply said, "Because this is where we live. And even if we didn't, it's where people live. That's enough." Stupid, glorious, terrifying. Down below, in the arid plains of Caldara's southern hemisphere, Commander Maya Trask of the Earth Resistance Forces surveyed the latest scans. Her jaw tightened as her second-in-command, Sergeant Lomax, gave her the casualty probabilities. "We're looking at 85% projected loss if they hit from orbit." "Better odds than the last mission," Maya muttered, folding up the holopad. She was barely 40, her face weathered by dozens of ground wars. She had buried friends on more planets than most species had even visited. But what weighed on her most wasn't fear. It was rage. Rage at the Council's cowardice. Rage at the way they watched planets fall like dominoes and called it strategy. Rage that in a universe so vast, the only ones willing to stand were the ones everyone had mocked for being too emotional, too irrational, too human. Back at orbit, Nuren sent another request to the humans. "Reconsider. You don't have to die here." The reply was simple, pinged back in a single line of text. "Someone has to show them we're not food." It wasn't bravado, it was a promise. As the days turned to hours, Caldara 7 became a fortress. Humans activated old mining drills to serve as artillery. They reprogrammed abandoned Sithari agricultural bots into suicide drones. They wired every square mile of desert with traps. They turned a colony into a war machine. And then the swarm came. It didn't arrive like thunder. It was thunder. The sky darkened, not from clouds, but from wings, tentacles, steel limbs, moving like insects under a microscope. It was a wave of hunger, reaching out to claim its next victim. And humanity stood up. They didn't pray for a miracle. They didn't hope the swarm would pass them by. They grabbed their rifles, their tools, their grit, and said, "Not here." The first swarm wave hit just before dawn. There was no warning, no screech of war horns or signals. One moment the horizon was empty, and the next it was boiling with motion. The ground shook beneath millions of metal legs, crawling, scuttling, tunneling forward. In the sky, dark shapes flitted between cloud layers, long serpentine creatures with wings that looked more like razors than skin. They didn't pause, didn't slow. The swarm had no need for strategy. It overwhelmed by sheer numbers, by a hunger that never needed rest. Commander Maya Trask stood atop Outpost Red Fang, her boots sunk into reinforced alloy plating, her rifle slung across her shoulder. Around her, soldiers scrambled into position, men and women from Earth, from Mars, even a few volunteers from the Jovian colonies. Every last one of them had signed up, knowing the odds, and not a single one had flinched when it was time to deploy. "Keep the artillery offline until they're within 5 clicks," Maya ordered calmly into her comms. "We're not wasting shells on the vanguard. Let them feel the teeth before we fire the fangs." Below, trenches lit up with motion. Auto turrets locked into place, scavenged Sithari plasma rails hummed as they drew power from makeshift cores. Drones buzzed in formation, carrying payloads the size of small buildings. And still the swarm came. From orbit, Nuren watched in horror. It was one thing to talk of courage, another to witness it played out against annihilation. The humans weren't preparing for victory. They were preparing to make the swarm remember them. At 4.7 kilometers out, the first line of biomech horrors crossed into the kill zone. "Now!" Maya whispered. The world exploded. Every inch of ground between the outpost and the approaching horde erupted in light and shrapnel. Claymores hidden under sand shredded the front ranks. Railguns launched electrified slugs that cooked flesh and melted armor. The mining drills Maya's engineers had retrofitted into launchers fired barrels filled with incendiary gel into the sky, bursting mid-air and showering the enemy in sticky flames. The swarm flinched. For the first time on record, it hesitated. That was all the humans needed. Maya led the first charge herself. "For Earth!" she screamed, and her voice was caught by thousands behind her. From the trenches poured soldiers in armored suits, firing pulse rounds and hurling grenades with unnatural precision. Flamethrowers turned the air thick with ash. And in the middle of it all, a single war banner flew. A patchwork cloth stitched with the flags of old Earth nations, from the stars and stripes to the red dragon of Wales. It wasn't about nationalism. It was about memory, about not being forgotten. Sergeant Lomax took a hit to the shoulder, screamed, and kept fighting. Private Echo from Jakarta lost her right arm to a clawed creature, tied off the wound, and used her left hand to throw herself onto a detonator, taking 10 swarm units with her. They didn't fear death. They welcomed it, as long as it meant slowing the tide. Hours passed. The battlefield became a graveyard of twitching limbs, burning metal, and red sand turned black with blood. And still, the swarm came. But it was no longer a smooth wave. Now it stuttered, fragmented, learning the hard way that this planet was not an easy meal, that these humans were not prey. They were defiant, suicidal, and worst of all, they were inventive. In a temporary lull, Maya found herself face down in the dirt, breathing hard, her armor punctured in 3 places. Her hands shook from exhaustion. Her hearing rang from the concussions. Lomax limped to her side and helped her up. "We're holding, somehow," he said. "For now," she replied grimly. She looked out across the field. Smoke curled into the air like the fingers of the dead, reaching toward the stars. They had held the line. Barely. But this was just the first wave, and everyone knew it. Night fell over Caldara 7 like a slow, choking curtain. Smoke still rose from the charred battlefield, curling up toward a sky too quiet to be real. There were no stars visible, only the black, shifting mass of the swarm hovering like a hungry storm on the edge of vision. The first wave had been repelled, yes, but the humans knew better than to celebrate. The swarm didn't mourn its dead. It only calculated. Inside the makeshift command bunker, Maya Trask stood over a cracked hollow table, watching projections flicker from bright blue to angry red. The heat from the battle still clung to her skin, despite the cooling vents whining overhead. Her armor had been removed, revealing a tattered undersuit soaked in blood. Some hers, most not. Lomax sat on a crate nearby, his shoulder crudely stitched and bound, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. He had the look of a man who had seen the edge of the world and was still trying to convince himself he'd come back from it. "We lost Sector 9, Maya said without emotion. "Ridge collapsed. Took out the artillery battery there. 36 dead. 11 missing." Lomax didn't respond right away. He stared at the wall like it might answer for him. "We bought a few hours." "Maybe," he muttered. "Long enough to reset the traps and get the drones back online. Long enough to die slower." Maya exhaled through her nose and looked at the central point on the map, the outpost, marked by a dull white dot surrounded by a spreading red tide. "They're adapting," she said. "They're starting to ignore our automated fire, only going after live targets." "Because we're the threat now," Lomax said grimly. "We made them bleed." They both knew that wasn't a metaphor. The swarm wasn't just machines, it was biomechanical, some fusion of steel, flesh, and instinct. They could bleed, just not the way humans did. They leaked black fluids that hissed when exposed to air, and they shrieked when injured, like dying animals laced with metal. But worst of all, they remembered. Not in a conscious way, more like a hive mind reflex. Each wave was different, smarter, harder to kill. A message blinked in red on the corner of the table. "Incoming transmission, Sithari command vessel." Maya didn't answer right away. Her jaw tightened and she tapped it open. Nuren's holographic form appeared, his expression unreadable behind those wide insectoid eyes. "You survived the first wave," he said carefully, as if still not sure whether to be impressed or disturbed. "Barely," Maya replied, "but we're still here, unlike the rest of you." Nuren ignored the jab. "We have new intelligence. The swarm's central mass, its primary brain, is relocating toward your sector. You've drawn its interest." "Good," Maya said without flinching. "Maybe now we can kill it." Nuren blinked slowly, his voice tight with disbelief. "You don't understand. This isn't a drone hive. It's the mind core, the central node that connects all units in this quadrant. If it arrives, your defensive position will collapse in minutes. We estimate a 97% casualty rate." Maya gave a bitter smile. "Then it's a good thing we've been building a surprise." Nuren's eyes narrowed. "What have you done?" Maya tapped a new icon. A schematic lit up on the table. Project Gorgon. Lomax whistled under his breath. Even he hadn't seen this one completely laid out. "We found an old Sithari planetary disruptor buried in the canyon," Maya said. "Decommissioned, forgotten, too unstable for your council to authorize. We fixed it, or patched it enough to work once. That device wasn't meant for warfare. It's a tectonic disruptor. If it's fired, you'll destroy the entire southern hemisphere." Nuren said sharply. Maya's stare didn't waver. "If that thing lands its mind core near us, we don't need the hemisphere. We need them dead." For a moment the alien didn't speak. Then finally, "You're insane." "We're human," she replied. "Insanity's just how we spell survival." The transmission cut. Outside, beyond the outpost, the swarm began to move again. Their patterns shifted, more organized now, less frantic. They weren't attacking blindly. They were marching. Something was coming. Something big. Maya strapped her armor back on, blood-stained and cracked. She looked over her soldiers, tired and bruised, but not broken. "Get some sleep," she told Lomax. "Tomorrow we show the universe what insanity really looks like." He gave a dry laugh and leaned his head back. "Remind me why we didn't evacuate again?" She paused at the door. because someone had to draw the line. The ground began to vibrate just before sunrise. At first it was faint, like distant thunder underfoot, but soon it deepened into a steady tremor, a monstrous heartbeat echoing beneath the crust of Caldera 7. Everyone in the outpost felt it. Soldiers stopped mid-step. Technicians glanced up from their work. Even the wounded stirred, as if some primal instinct told them, "The monster is here." Commander Maya Trask stood on the southern ridge, helmet locked, armor fully sealed. Her visor displayed 100 live feeds from drones, satellites, and scouts. All of them showed the same thing: a dark wall approaching. Not a metaphorical one, a real wall of chitin, steel, and fluid motion. The swarm was no longer skittering across the land like bugs. Now they advanced like an army. Towers of sinewy machines strode forward on 8 legs, flanked by thousands of lesser units. Flying forms soared overhead, casting huge shadows that danced across the desert. And in the center of it all moved something larger, slower, surrounded by a shifting cloud of drones acting like a shield. The Mind Core. It looked like a living fortress, part insect hive, part AI monolith. Its surface pulsed with an eerie violet glow, almost like a beating organ, and every few seconds it released a deep, bass-heavy hum that caused nearby electronics to flicker. This was no mindless beast. It was intelligent, a network of war and logic, emotionless and relentless. Back in the command bunker, Lomax adjusted the controls on the planetary disruptor. Project Gorgon. It had been buried beneath the rock, locked in an ancient vault left by the Zithari before their exodus. Originally built to collapse enemy strongholds during civil wars, it had never been meant for open deployment. Now it was humanity's only real shot. "The core will be in range in 22 minutes," Lomax said over the radio, his voice grim. "Once we activate it, there's no turning back." "I know," Maya replied. "And we can't evacuate anyone that fast. If you stay up top, you won't make it." "I know that, too." There was silence for a moment on the comms. Then Lomax added, softer, "You don't have to die here, Maya." She almost smiled. "I think I do." She turned toward her unit, what remained of them. Barely a few hundred now. Their armor scorched, eyes bloodshot, some missing limbs, some patched with bioskin and pain suppressors. They looked like hell. They looked like heroes. She raised her voice over the rising wind. "We've done more than anyone ever expected. Hell, more than anyone ever believed we could. But this is it. They've brought their goddamn brain to our front yard, and we're gonna stab it in the heart." A low murmur of laughter rippled through the troops. Not the kind of laugh that comes from jokes, but the kind that rises from defiance, from people too broken to be afraid anymore. Maya continued, "We hit them hard. We draw them in. Then Lomax fires the disruptor. We die, maybe. But they die first." Someone shouted, "For Earth!" Another, "For the line!" It caught like wildfire. "For Luna! For the belt! For home!" Maya turned back to the ridge, breathing slowly. The swarm was close enough now that she could see details, how the creatures twitched, how they clicked against one another, how they focused not on destruction, but on absorption. They didn't kill out of malice. They consumed, repurposed, recycled. They erased identity. But humanity didn't erase easy. "All units," Maya called, "fire at will." And the sky caught fire. Missiles screamed from buried silos. Lasers cut across the horizon. Mortars exploded in the air, sending hot metal rain down on the swarm. It was louder than any thunderstorm, brighter than any sunrise. But the swarm kept coming, even as limbs fell and bodies tore apart. They absorbed losses like a tide absorbs stones. Closer now, a kilometer, then half. Maya leapt into the trench and fired her plasma rifle until the barrel burned. She didn't stop. None of them did. They screamed, they bled, they fought, they refused. Back in the bunker, Lomax stared at the disruptor screen. The mind core entered the kill zone. Now or never, he muttered. He pressed the trigger. The screen went white, and the Earth began to scream. The scream of the Earth wasn't like anything Maya had ever heard before. It was as if the planet itself had awoken in agony. The ground twisted and buckled under her boots. Deep fissures cracked open across the battlefield, swallowing swarm creatures and humans alike. The air grew impossibly hot, not from fire or flame, but from raw, unchained energy erupting from the planet's crust. A light burst out from the center of the valley, a white-gold spear of energy that pierced the sky, splitting clouds in half. The shockwave followed seconds later. It didn't just knock Maya off her feet, it threw her across the trench, like she weighed nothing. Her armor scraped along the ground, and her ears went numb from the pressure blast. The sound faded into a low, vibrating hum, like the planet was breathing its last. Then silence. No gunfire, no screams, just the wind, whispering through the carnage. Maya blinked, vision blurry, her helmet cracked down the middle. Her HUD was dead, her comms fried. She pulled herself up, muscles trembling. Around her, pieces of the outpost lay in ruins. Metal warped and twisted, turrets offline, towers snapped in half. But the swarm was gone. Where once there had been a black tide of machines and bio-beasts, now there was a massive crater, smouldering and glassed over from the heat. What remained of the mind core sat at the center of it, cracked open like an egg. Pieces of its shell twitched feebly, the purple glow inside flickering, fading. Dead. It was dying. Maybe not entirely, but enough. She limped toward the edge of the crater, one arm hanging useless. Around her, survivors began to rise. A few dozen, maybe 100 at most. Blackened, wounded, coughing blood. But alive. A voice rasped behind her. Maya. She turned. Lomax stood at the bunker entrance, his face burned on one side, an emergency stim tube in his neck, but his eyes alert. He grinned, crooked and bleeding, but proud. You did it, she said hoarsely. He coughed. We did it. They stared at the crater together. The sky above it had turned a strange color, like the atmosphere itself was scorched. Ash fell like snow. For miles there was no movement, no swarm, no reinforcements, no second wave. The mind core had been the nerve center, and they had ripped it out. Comms are down, Lomax said, scanning a shattered panel. We'll need to send a drone to the Cythery orbiters. Maya shook her head. They'll know. They're watching. Sure enough, a soft chirp came from a nearby drone as it reconnected to a satellite channel. A moment later, a hologram blinked into existence above the ground. Nuren's face appeared again, less composed this time. Behind him, alien officers bustled, frantic, as they stared at their own screens. Commander Trask, he said quietly, we're detecting a seismic anomaly the size of a continent. The mind core is no longer transmitting. Maya looked him dead in the eyes. It's dead. You're welcome. Nuren didn't respond right away. Then finally he said, This should not have been possible. No civilization has ever destroyed a mind core in open battle. We're not like other civilizations. She replied. He tilted his head. Number you are not. For a moment the alien's voice softened. The Council is convening. There is talk of reinstating Earth's status as a sovereign member of the Galactic Accord, perhaps even offering reparations. Maya didn't answer. He added, There are some among us who now believe humanity is necessary, that your refusal to retreat, to surrender, to survive at all costs, it is something we have forgotten, something we might need. Maya stepped forward, past the projection. "We didn't do this for your approval." "I know," Nurin said. "That's why it matters." The hologram blinked out. Lomax sat down on a broken crate and stared at the sunrise. It was red and grey, a sky smeared with war and ash. But the sun was rising. That was something. Maya stood beside him, watching the horizon. "They'll come again, won't they?" "Eventually," Lomax said. "Another swarm, another threat." She nodded. "Then we'll be ready." A silence stretched between them. Not heavy, just tired. "Think the others'll believe this?" Lomax muttered. Maya smiled faintly. "They better, because I'm not doing it again." They both laughed. Quiet, broken laughter. The kind only survivors know. The rebuilding didn't begin with machines or materials. It began with silence. Heavy, aching silence as survivors stood among ruins and realized they were still breathing. That silence was filled with the memory of friends who didn't make it, of screams that wouldn't stop echoing inside their heads. But beneath all that, somewhere deep in the marrow of their bones, there was something else. Pride. They had stood when everyone else ran. Humanity had faced extinction with teeth bared and guns blazing, and they'd made the impossible happen. They'd slain a mind core, something entire galactic civilizations had never dared to try. But survival came with its own price. 3 days passed before the first real supply ship touched down. It wasn't Sithari, but a mixed vessel. Sithari medics, a few insectoid Grell engineers, and even a stoic contingent of Varani guards, all wearing neutral colors to avoid triggering bad blood. They stepped onto the ash-covered soil of Caldara 7, like they were walking on cursed ground. They were right. Maya didn't meet them with a salute. She was out in the ruins of the trench line, helping dig out the final bodies. Her arm had been repaired with a temporary synth sleeve, and her face was lined with exhaustion that even sleep couldn't erase. Lomax was there too, slower now, using a metal rod as a cane, but refusing to sit still. When the lead Sithari medic approached her, he bowed stiffly. "Commander Trask, we're here to assist and decontaminate the area." Maya didn't look up right away. She laid a shattered helmet gently beside a burned body and finally turned. "You weren't here when we needed you," she said coldly. The medic flinched. We were under orders." "I know." She cut him off. "I just want you to see what that cowardice cost." He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Behind her, engineers began laying sensor beacons and scanning the crater. The mind core was dead, yes, but its components were still dangerous. The Sithari wanted to collect them, analyze them, weaponize them. Maya could see it in their movements. Their curiosity always came before their conscience. Lomax approached her later, after the medics had cleared a space for the wounded and set up sterile tents. "They're calling it a turning point," he said, watching one of the engineers lift a still-smoking shard of the mind core into a containment box. "For them, maybe," Maya replied. "For us, it was just another day we refused to die. You don't want credit? I don't want them turning us into a story that makes them feel better. We bled alone. Let them remember that." That night, a message came in. Not a direct transmission, but a broadcast across all Open Alliance frequencies. It was a human voice, an admiral from EarthGov, one who had stayed quiet when the orders came to abandon the colonies. "This is Admiral Jules Coran," the voice began. "To all surviving units on Caldara 7, we owe you our lives. You showed the galaxy what it means to fight like a human, what it means to endure." Lomax rolled his eyes when he heard it. Now they want to play hero too? But Maya just listened. Her face was unreadable. "We are reinstating military control of the frontier sectors." The message continued. "Caldara 7 will serve as a memorial site and a stronghold. The swarm will return, but next time we won't run. We'll fight beside you. The message ended with a final salute. It sounded good, stirring, noble. But Maya had heard too many speeches to trust any of them. The next morning, she stood before the survivors, barely 95 left from over 2,000 who'd once manned the outpost. Most had burns, scars, missing limbs. No one was untouched, but they stood tall, silent, waiting. Maya raised her voice. "They'll come again." No one flinched. "They'll try to rewrite this, make it into propaganda, make it clean." Still silence. But we remember. We remember what it felt like when the sky fell, when no one came, when we refused to run. Then she looked out across the blasted horizon, still ringed with smoke and ash. This is our planet now, our crater, our war. And if they want to use it as a symbol, fine. Let it be a symbol of something real. That when every other species fled, humanity stood its ground. A quiet voice in the back answered. Humanity said, "Come and get us." They didn't leave Caldara 7. Not after the battle, not after the swarm fell. Even when the Sithari ships begged them to board, to return to comfort and safety, the survivors stayed. Because something had changed. This was no longer just a battlefield, it was hallowed ground. And not in some ceremonial way. No, Caldara 7 felt different now, as if the land had been scarred with the DNA of human defiance. The crater wasn't just a pit anymore, it was a monument, one that screamed louder than any statue or speech could. So they stayed. They built new walls with salvaged swarm armor, strange organic metal plates that shimmered with a pulse when touched. They embedded the ruins of the mind core into the soil, shaping a perimeter that hummed with dormant energy. Engineers, both human and alien, argued about the risks. The survivors didn't care. They wanted everyone who saw it to remember what had happened here. That the strongest mind in the galaxy had died in this dirt. Lomax oversaw most of the reconstruction, limping from zone to zone, barking orders and cracking jokes in equal measure. He'd started calling it New Bastion. It caught on. Maya had other concerns. The swarm hadn't sent a signal before dying. No last scream, no data burst, no revenge beacon. That bothered her. Something that advanced, that coordinated, should have left a message. But the mind core had gone silent. Too silent. It felt incomplete. One morning, as she stood alone near the edge of the crater, watching the sun rise behind dust-streaked clouds, she heard it. Not a sound, but a pulse. Faint, like the echo of a whisper. She pulled out her scanner. The device flickered, glitched, readings unstable. Beneath her feet, the earth hummed in uneven beats. She followed it, down into the crater, over scorched ground and fused glass, until she reached what was left of the mind core's heart. Most of it had been taken apart by researchers. But deep beneath the central spire, just under a collapsed tunnel, something still moved. Buried. Alive. She called Lomax immediately. He arrived with a small team and specialized gear. It took hours to cut through the debris without triggering the unstable swarm tech. Finally, they revealed it. A sphere, no bigger than a human head, pulsing slowly, weakly, but undeniably aware. Lomax stared at it. "That's a neural seed." Maya nodded grimly. "A backup core. The engineers wanted to transport it, study it in a lab, dissect its code, but Maya saw the danger before anyone else did. It's thinking," she warned. "It's waiting." They argued. Some said it was harmless in this state, that the blast had scrambled its logic systems, that it could never reconstitute without external input. But Maya wasn't convinced. She remembered the way the swarm had adapted, how they'd mimicked tactics, turned corpses into soldiers, machines into monsters. They learned. And now, this seed was learning too. She ordered it sealed in a containment vault, buried deep under reinforced earth. Around it they built a tower, not to protect it, but to watch it, 24 hours a day. No signals in, no power feeds, nothing to help it grow. Lomax gave the place a name, the Watchtower. It became the core of New Bastion, and as word spread through the galaxy of humanity's survival and the Mind Core's death, others began to arrive. Not Sithari diplomats, not scientists, warriors, veterans from Earth, colonists who'd lost homes, mercenaries looking to fight for something real. They didn't come for glory. They came because they knew what was coming. The swarm would return. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not even in their lifetimes. But it would return. And next time, it wouldn't underestimate humanity. Maya addressed the first wave of newcomers from a makeshift platform overlooking the blackened crater. Her voice was steady, her stance firm. "They think we're rebuilding a base. They're wrong," she said. "We're building a message." She pointed to the watchtower rising behind her, tall and jagged like a spear through the sky. "Let them come. Let them see this place and remember that when every other species ran, when the sky turned black and the stars fell silent, we stayed." She looked at each of them in turn, her voice dropping low. "We're the line in the ash." The sky was clear the day the message came. Not a threat, not a warning, just a signal. A single pulse carried on deep space bands, encoded in a language no one had dared to hear again. Swarm protocol. The kind of signal that made hardened men clench their jaws and diplomats go pale. It came from beyond the galactic rim, a place no one had charted. A dead zone. Until now. Maya stood inside the watchtower's observation deck, staring at the data feed as it scrolled across the screen in jittery red glyphs. The neural seed had pulsed in rhythm with it. Just once. Then went silent again. "Is it talking to us?" Lomax asked, arms crossed, his face hard as granite. "No," Maya said. "It's listening." The message wasn't detailed, just 3 words repeated in an eerie pattern. "We remember you." Panic didn't follow, not anymore. Humanity had already faced the end once. Caldara 7 had hardened them into something more than survivors. It had turned them into a warning. So they didn't flee. Instead, they dug deeper. The watchtower became more than a memorial. It turned into a fortress. EarthGov sanctioned it as humanity's new military outpost for frontier defense. Weapons flowed in. Engineers from allied species arrived to reinforce its architecture. Even the Sithari, once too afraid to stand beside humans, now offered joint command. But Maya never left the core. Never left the seed. It hadn't spoken since the transmission, but it knew they were there, watching, waiting, daring it to make the next move. And in that silence, something shifted inside her. She wasn't afraid anymore, not even angry, just resolved. This war was no longer about survival. It was about identity. Humanity had been cast as the primitive species, the emotional ones, the chaotic ones, too unpredictable for diplomacy, too stubborn to fit into the galactic mold. But that very chaos, that fire, was what had saved them. Now others began to take notice. Visitors came to New Bastion. Fighters from distant sectors, exiles, disgraced captains, orphaned colonies, all drawn to the same unspoken truth. When the swarm returns, it won't be to fight the galaxy. It will come for Earth. And Earth won't be alone this time. Maya walked the walls of the compound each day, speaking little, listening more. She wasn't a soldier anymore, not just. She was something else, a sentinel, a symbol. On the 6th-month anniversary of the Battle of Caldara 7, they lit the beacon at the watchtower's peak. A blast of red-orange fire, visible from orbit, crackling against the sky like a flare from the heart of Earth itself. Ships in nearby sectors watched it burn. Some cheered, others grew uneasy. The message was clear. We are not running. Late that night, Lomax joined Maya by the crater edge. The sky above them was scattered with stars and ships. The orbital docks were full again. But this time, they weren't evacuating. "Do you believe it's really coming back?" he asked. Maya didn't blink. "Not a question of if, only when." He nodded slowly. "You think we'll survive again?" She looked at the watchtower, at the people training on the grounds, at the young ones, barely old enough to remember what Caldera looked like before the ash, at the seed beneath their feet, still pulsing every so often like a slow, patient heartbeat. "No," she said. "I think next time we win." Lomax grinned. "That's one hell of a gamble." Maya finally smiled too. Small, hard, but real. "We've always been gamblers. That's what they never understood." And as the wind howled through the broken edges of the crater, carrying dust and memory into the dark sky, something in the seed stirred again. No words this time, just a flicker, a faint electric impression. Curiosity. Because even it, this cold, calculating fragment of an ancient machine mind, wanted to know what kind of species would rather die standing than live on its knees. And now it would have time to learn. Because humanity wasn't going anywhere, not today, not tomorrow, not ever. They were the storm that stood in the silence. They were the scream in the void. They were the ones who didn't run.